bottlenose dolphins visiting a beach in Western Australia. Along this narrow strip of sand, two worlds meet. For more than 2,000 years, dolphins have been fabled for their friendliness, their apparent wish to play with us. A privileged encounter such as this is the closest most of us ever get to the life of the sea. Legends tell of dolphins carrying people on their backs. Today, they'll carry us on a journey to the shallow seas that lie along the shore. Bays like this lie between beach and reef throughout the tropics. If coral reefs are the rainforests of the ocean, these sand flats are the deserts. And those dark patches are the grasslands, the savannas. The water here is barely deep enough to drown in, but it's far from lifeless. Stingrays, hunters. But what is there to hunt? The seafloor looks almost sterile. Tourists pass it by without a glance on their way to the reefs beyond. The shellfish the stingrays eat are buried in the sand. In some ways, these open sand flats are just as hostile as a true desert. They're scoured by tidal currents, baked by the sun. But those currents and that warmth can bring fertility, make the desert bloom. Our dolphins lead us from the sand to the savannah. This isn't seaweed, it's seagrass, one of the few kinds of flowering plant that can grow permanently submerged in salty water. Seagrasses thrive in calm, sunlit shallows throughout the tropics. Like the grassy plains of Africa, they have their hunters and their grazers, and those include a very special creature. In the fevered imaginations of sailors too long at sea, this was a mermaid, though the Aboriginal name of sea pig seems more appropriate. In fact, it's a dugong, and it eats seagrass. This submarine savanna has predators too, a sea snake. The grasslands are fertile feeding and breeding grounds for fish. There's always something here for a snake to hunt. So potential prey resort to camouflage. The honeycomb pattern of a boxfish breaks up its outline, helps it merge with its seagrass surroundings. A Moses sole mimics a patch of sand. There seems no limit to the forms a fish can assume. A sea moth, patterned like the sand. and a scorpionfish, sprouting fins and flaps of skin like a clump of seagrass. The seagrass fields have even stranger denizens. Like Medusa's snaky tresses, a living forest rises from the grass. Eels, garden eels. They feed on drifting plankton, so they have to keep their heads up in the current. But that leaves them open to attack, and the seagrass is too short to hide in. The answer is a bolt hole. When danger threatens, the eels sink down out of sight. Not that dugongs pose a threat. They may eat the occasional mollusk or sea pen, but they live almost entirely on seagrass roots. Out in the desert, there's even less cover. For creatures that aren't camouflaged, the safety of a burrow is even more essential. This hole is shared by a pair of prawns and a goby. It seems an unequal partnership. The prawns do all the hard work, digging out the burrow, and the fish just sits there. It gets a hole to hide in, but what does it give in return? The prawns are almost blind, but the fish has good eyesight. The prawns use it as a lookout. So long as it's outside the hole, they're safe. They literally keep in touch with it with their long antennae. When danger threatens, the goby sees it coming, and all the partners take refuge in the burrow. If shallow sand flats are the deserts of the sea, coral heads like this are the oases, places to feed and to shelter. Coral heads support their own community, creatures that wouldn't survive out on the sands. They even have their own scorpionfish, disguised as living coral. Coral heads attract hunters. A triggerfish searches the sand for buried mollusks. A well-directed jet of water can blow their cover. The same technique can be used to upend a sea urchin and so get round its protective spines. This time the urchin escapes, but perhaps a broomtail wrasse will succeed where the triggerfish failed. Fish like this are small enough to take refuge in the coral. They can flaunt their colours without risk of attack. The brazen display attracts a mate. Out in the desert, courtship must be very different. These are peacock flounders, flattened miracles of sandy camouflage. The male flounder has a dilemma: how to woo a partner without inviting the attentions of passing predators. His secret weapon in this stealthy dance is a flamboyant dorsal fin, invisible at rest, but highly conspicuous erect. Despite the male's best efforts, this female's not impressed. When spotted dolphins are hunting, the flounder's camouflage is tested to the limit. Even buried in the sand, they may not escape detection. Just a mouthful for a dolphin, but the last dance for a flounder. Column of spiny lobsters. Just as tanks in the desert are vulnerable to attack from the air, so even the heaviest crustacean armor can be penetrated. From the largest dolphin to the smallest fish, almost everything that swims here depends to some degree on seagrass for a living. There are a dozen kinds of seagrass, and in these shallow sunlit waters they grow fast, turning the sun's energy into food for grazers such as goatfish and rabbitfish. Seagrass beds can produce the equivalent of 6 crops of wheat a year. The fish they feed are food in turn for hunters like dolphins. If dolphins are the lions of these submarine savannas, dugong are the elephants, the ultimate converters of greenery into animal matter. In fact, elephants are their closest land-based relatives. Compared to other grazers of these underwater meadows, dugongs are giants. They can grow to 3 meters and weigh almost as much as a cow. Indeed, they're also called sea cows, the last survivors, with their New World cousins, the manatees, of a group of mammals that's been hunted almost to extinction. Dugongs live almost entirely on seagrass. Their downward-facing mouths are ideally suited to grubbing up roots and rhizomes. A heavy skeleton provides the ballast to keep them on the bottom. The 30 meters of gut they need to digest all that vegetation account for their portly appearance. To the sailors of times past, dugongs with their mermaid tails were sirens, enchantresses whose songs lured ships to destruction in the shallows. But to the Aboriginal people of Australia, the dugong sings a different song. Back in the dream time, the dugong lived on land with her brother, the moon. Then, one day, collecting lotus roots in a billabong, she was bitten by a leech. She took refuge in the sea, leaving the moon alone with his reflection. In those distant times, land and sea were alive, every rock and every grain of sand a part of one great vital force. Even today, the sand can still come to life as hatchling turtles head for the sea and the seagrass that will be their nursery. At night, the water comes alive too. Infant seahorses prance in the plankton. Down below, the parents of these fishy foals anchor themselves in meadows of seagrass. Even more curious, a sea dragon, a miniature monster hunting the grassy glades for tiny crustaceans. Night is the time for plankton eaters of many kinds, from the small to the unbelievably huge. A manta ray. Mantas can grow to 7 meters or more, but on the tiniest of creatures, channeled into their open mouths by those forward-pointing flaps. At dawn, the manta's dance will end. The plankton on which it feeds sinks into the deep. The rising sun lights other hunters. On a falling tide, some of these sand flats are exposed, roosting places for pelicans. The dawn patrol sets out in search of food. At low water, the coastal shallows are even shallower. The bottom's now within reach of questing beaks. Pelicans share their hunting grounds with dolphins, drawn here by the wealth of fish around the seagrass. These shallow, sheltered waters are nurseries for fish of many kinds. They come inshore from the reefs to spawn in the underwater meadows. For a dolphin, the seagrass fields give easy pickings. The fish may be small, but their numbers are huge. A dugong mother and her calf. Dugongs can live for 70 years or more. Females don't give birth until they're at least 10 years old. The calf will stay with its mother for the first 18 months of its life, even riding on her back for protection. Dugongs are tied to the warm and shallow waters where the seagrass grows. It's the mainstay of their diet. Dolphins too use the seagrass savannas to breed. There's less risk from sharks away from the deep water. But as fish eaters, they're free to roam where they will. A sunken ship becomes a man-made oasis. Decks where mariners once trod now give secure footing for corals, denied an anchorage in the shifting sands around the wreck. This artificial coral reef shelters fish by the thousand. Many will have started their lives offshore, spawned among the seagrass. They move to the reef as they mature. Coral reefs support a richness of life unrivaled in the tropical seas. That richness owes much to the fertility of the bays behind the reefs, the warm and sheltered nurseries of the sea grass. Less spectacular perhaps, but a vital part of the economy of the ocean. Our bay watch has come to an end. Here our dolphin guides will leave us. The dolphins swim on, out into the blue. But that's another story.
"40 million years ago in Australia, new plants were evolving in the forests of the dinosaurs. In amongst the great tree ferns were the first plants with flowers. To ensure their survival, these plants had to persuade animals to carry their pollen from one plant to another. In order to achieve this, one family of plants, the Banksias, evolved one of the most remarkable and enduring alliances with a mammal in the world. This is the descendant of that prehistoric pollinator, the honey possum. In southwestern Australia, spring brings cold winds and rain from the Antarctic. There are still flowers blooming, but where are the pollinators? Insects find it hard to fly in such bad weather, so these strange flowers must be trying to attract some other animal to pollinate them. The bright colours of the scarlet banksia are signals to a family of birds called honey-eaters which specialise in feeding on nectar. In this ancient corner of the world, birds have become the most important pollinators. Whatever the weather, this New Holland honey-eater will carry pollen from plant to plant. If the supply of nectar is good, then the honey-eaters will settle down to breed. Nectar provides energy, but when the honey-eaters have young to feed, they alternate the sweet with the savoury, bringing one beakful of nectar and then one of insects, which are rich in protein. Scarlet banksias only release a small amount of nectar at a time. This encourages the honey-eater to move from flower to flower, remaining faithful to the same species. But this isn't always the case. There are a dozen species of honey-eaters in the southwest. The smallest is the western spinebill, the largest, the red wattlebird. In some places, banksias grow in dense stands. These concentrated sources of food are a valuable resource and are heavily guarded by families of red wattlebirds. Any intruders that are driven off inadvertently carry pollen to another scarlet banksia colony. Not all birds are interested in nectar. These parrots are ripping the florets apart to reach beetle larvae, which are feeding on the developing seeds below. It looks as though the birds must be destroying the plant, but the parrots are only removing florets which have already been damaged by the beetles, giving healthy ones a better chance of survival. European settlers called this tall flower spike a black boy because they thought it resembled a native carrying a spear. As the weather gets warmer, an insect appears which most Australians would rather do without, the bush fly. The black boy provides nectar for these ill-equipped opportunists. Bush flies mainly feed on carrion and dung, and their short tongues cannot reach the nectar deep inside scarlet banksia flowers, but here they can easily mop it up from the surface. In contrast, the tube-like flowers of the chitak bush can only be pollinated by birds with very long beaks. Each time the yellow-throated miner, another honey-eater, thrusts its bill deep inside the flower, curved stamens dab a spot of pollen onto the bird's head. It will carry this to the next chitak bush it visits. But not all the birds feeding here are doing the chitak a favour. The white-naped honey-eater has a short beak, so it reaches the nectar by piercing the base of the tube. In this way, it cheats the plant by stealing nectar without pollinating the chitak in return. But it was European settlers who were responsible for bringing a new breed of robber to Australia. Before European settlement, there were no honeybees here at all. Though bees are the main pollinators of plants in Europe, they are not adapted to pollinate these alien flowers on a continent thousands of miles away. Bees rob the banksias of their nectar, giving nothing in return. As night falls, the heady scent given off by slender banksias attracts moths. A predator creeps through the shadows. It knows that sooner or later a moth will come down to feed. These fierce little marsupial mice mainly hunt insects, but even they sometimes turn to nectar. Animals very similar to these may have scurried around on the forest floor beneath the feet of the dinosaurs. The bush rat is a relative newcomer to Australia. It's only had 1 million years to adapt since it crossed over from Asia, and it shows. It seems much too heavy and clumsy to be clambering about on the fine branches of banksia in search of seeds. The strangest animal of all is just beginning to wake up. In contrast to the bush rat, the tiny marsupial honey possum is perfectly at home amongst the leaves of the slender banksia. Apart from some bats, this is the only mammal in the world which feeds exclusively on nectar and pollen. It's more like an insect than a mammal, barely 3 inches long and weighing only 1/3 of an ounce. Its long, pointed nose can be pushed deep into the dense flower heads, and the tongue is like a minute toothbrush, ideal for mopping up nectar. Nectar is only scented sugar water and contains very few of the minerals which are important for teeth and bones. The honey possum is perfectly adapted to this shortage. It has only a few peg-like teeth and little hands without claws. Its bones are incredibly light. Its prehensile tail and monkey-like hands allow it to recover from the most undignified situations. Honey possums spend most of their time alone searching out banksia flowers to feed on. In one night, they may visit a dozen different flower heads, carrying pollen on their nose from one flower to the next. As soon as one species of plant stops flowering, another one begins, so there is never a shortage of nectar. Only occasionally do they meet another honey possum of the opposite sex. Honey possum males are much smaller than females. Most small mammals have to eat constantly to keep going, but the honey possum has found an ingenious solution to the problem. As day breaks, it simply curls up wherever it happens to find itself and goes to sleep. In order to save energy, the possum's body temperature and metabolic rate falls so low that it is almost in a coma. It can remain in this state for as long as 10 days. It seems extraordinary that the honey possum doesn't build a nest, or at least avoid lying around in broad daylight. The reason for its apparent recklessness is soon revealed. The honey possum's ancient association with the banksia isn't only limited to nectar feeding. Its sleeping form is almost identical to a banksia seed pod. It is an astonishing protective strategy, and it works. Purple-crowned lorikeets have brush tongues for mopping up nectar and a gut which is extremely efficient at absorbing sugars. They feed on fruit, too, when it's in season. Nectar isn't the only attraction of banksia flowers. Jewel beetles, which look as though they have been beaten out of hammered metal, feed on the nutritious grains of pollen. These beetles were once collected to make brooches. They are joined by flower wasps. In this rather one-sided relationship, the females are flightless, so the males have to carry them around attached to their abdomen. They feed the helpless female by regurgitating a porridge of nectar and pollen. After months of sun and no rain, the summer vegetation is tinder dry. The few remaining pools are in constant use by honey-eaters, seizing the opportunity to have a last bath and remove the sticky nectar from their beaks and feathers. It is at this time of year, when the vegetation is at its driest, that the first summer thunderstorms begin. These electrical storms produce no rain, but lightning brings the risk of fire. This natural agent has been visiting this dry country for millions of years. It brings death to those animals which cannot outrun the flames. Honey possums sometimes take over abandoned birds' nests, but never use underground burrows. They inevitably die in the searing heat. At first sight, it would appear that fire brings nothing but desolation to the heathlands. But in fact, it releases minerals that are essential for plant. Some minerals are recycled, but others are blown away in the smoke of ash. Banksias are very efficient at extracting what few minerals remain. They're so well adapted to fire that some only release their seeds when the heat splits open the woody pods. The seeds fall into a bed of ash, which gives them a new start in life. Two years after a fire, the first Banksias are already colonizing the soil with a thin tapestry of leaves. They only flourish while sunlight reaches them. Later, taller shrubs and Banksias re-establish themselves. In spite of the apparent flush of growth, the grazing is very poor. Western grey kangaroos are large enough to process the bulk of vegetation required for a nutritious meal. With each successive bushfire, the soil gets poorer. After thousands of bushfires, these soils are little more than pure sand. Where the soil is slightly richer, the bush grows taller, and scrubby eucalyptus trees dominate. This is the home of another, unusual pollinator. The pygmy possum is not related to the honey possum. It has a full set of teeth and often eats insects. The shorter tongue can also reach the nectar in the shallow cups of the eucalyptus flowers. The pygmy possum is also much heavier than the honey possum. It would take 50 newborn honey possums to tip the scales on a pin. A honey possum pregnancy lasts little more than a fortnight. The tiny babies then climb into their mother's pouch. These babies are now fully developed, having spent 3 months growing in their mother's pouch, suckling her milk. Grooming is especially important when you spend all your time wading through sticky syrup. Their father has nothing to do with their upbringing and will go in search of other mates. The middle baby is nearly weaned. but still finds it easier to lick the nectar and pollen off its mother's nose than search for its own. The largest is almost independent and is already a skilled nectar feeder. Sometimes the mother leaves the babies on a leaf while she makes forays further afield. At other times, the babies hitch a ride on her back. There are few predators on the heathlands because there is very little worth eating. Bubbuks are the smallest owls in Australia and the most common here. They catch insects and the occasional small mammal. The owls often hunt in pairs. The male brings the food to his mate. As soon as they sense danger, the honey possums don't flee. They freeze. Only a twitching whisker gives them away. Predation has far less effect on the honey possum population than fire. And there is a new, far more insidious threat which may change the character of the heathlands forever. European settlers brought their own plants and their own diseases with them. One shipment of lemon trees was infected with a dieback fungus, a disease first found in the East Indies. Like smallpox, brought to native peoples, the Banksias have no natural immunity to dieback fungus. The disease is spreading through the heathlands at an alarming rate. The spores are often carried by vehicles from one place to another. Honey eaters are wanderers and can abandon an infected area. Other animals cannot. The fate of the tiny honey possum is bound to that of the Banksias and their relatives. Scientists are trying to find out just how serious the situation is by monitoring honey possum populations. The amount of fat stored at the base of the tail is a good indicator of how well an individual is doing. Bushfire has already seriously restricted the range of the honey possum. Now dieback is threatening what little is left. As the Banksias die, the year-round nectar supply is broken. The honey possums will starve. The population is decreasing, but it is still too early to blame this entirely on the dieback fungus. It may be that an unusually cold spring was partly responsible for this particular decline. Scientists are working hard to find a solution to the problem, but it is a race against time. The faster the fungus spreads, the more likely it becomes that we might witness the end of a unique partnership between mammal and plant, a partnership which has lasted for 30 million years.